Welcome to the Expository Songs Podcast. We discuss songs where the main idea of a passage of Scripture is the main idea of a song. My name is Daniel Mount, and today we're discussing the new Psallos album, A Sure Hope, created and mostly written by today's guest, Cody Curtis. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to. And listener, if you've never heard A Sure Hope, I encourage you to pause the podcast and listen to it. Not to confuse things, Psallos, a number of years ago, did an album called Romans. A Sure Hope is a new release of congregational songs from Romans. It just came out a few weeks ago, so if you haven't just listened to it, you haven't listened to it yet. We've linked to it in the show notes, and after you've listened, then I encourage you to come back for the conversation. Now, I like to ask first-time guests about their background, but we already covered that in episode 18, so I've linked to that in the show notes, and we don't need to reiterate that same ground yet. And then to the listeners, if you haven't heard that episode yet, I encourage you to listen to that one first if you like. We discuss Cody's background and the origin of the Psallos project in that episode. So jumping pretty much straight into discussing A Sure Hope. It's an album of congregational songs from Romans, released just a few weeks ago, based in part on the Psallos Romans album. I'd like to start by asking about how the album as a whole came together. And so as part of that, maybe we could revisit one thing we did touch on last time. Could you share about the origin of the original Romans project, and then how you decided to return to Romans for a second, more congregationally focused album?
Yeah. So the Romans album was our first major project that we put out. We released it in 2015. I wrote most of it in 2014. And this project was just something we did by itself. We didn't at that time have in mind that we would record, try to set all the New Testament letters to music, which we're striving to do now. It was just a matter of I was going through pastoral training, was writing songs, and it just, the Lord led me to try to adapt the entire letter to music, not word for word, but more of a paraphrase of it. And when I did that, I didn't really have much of a reference point for what kind of project this would be. I think I was pulling more from concept albums from music outside of the church, which helped to guide me and to shape it. And, it came out with this type of album, like a concept album, where it's very presentational. I wanted it to be worshipful, but I wasn't boxing myself in to try to write songs that could be sung by your average congregational. It turned into something that was, it's dramatic, it's artistic, it's all over the place stylistically. It's imaginative, and that's what I enjoy writing. And that's the approach I applied for Hebrews and Jude and Philippians and, for future albums. But congregational singing is something that I value very much. I'm a pastor at a church here. I've been leading music. That's mainly how I contribute to our church, is through the worship ministries through music. And I from the beginning, I wanted Psallos to be creating music, worship music that could be sung by others, because it's such an important part of the church body. But just, the more I did these New Testament albums, I think the more I realized that they're not meant for people to sing, and that's okay. We know that you can write worship music that is more for worshiping by listening as opposed to singing along in a Sunday morning service. So that's fine with us. But I can't remember when I was 2-3 years ago, I had the idea, as we're doing these presentational versions of our New Testament albums, what if I were to create a companion album to each of these? And the companion album would be more congregational songs that fit better for your average church to sing corporately. And so the album we just released a few weeks ago, A Sure Hope, Hymns of Romans, is the parallel album to our original Romans album. And it came about from the idea. And then I think the hope is that, Lord willing, we can then be creating a hymns of Hebrews and a hymns of Jude and hymns of Philippians as we go. We have our artistic presentational ones that's just meant to be thinking about how do we teach the letter creatively through music, and then the other ones that are more straightforward, more you could imagine them inside of a Sunday morning service.
That's neat, and I really do. I firmly believe there's a place for both. because there's a need for good congregational music from every part of the Bible. Our church is going through James right now,
Yeah.
and it's hard to find good songs that tie into the theme of that week's sermon. There's a few, but there are plenty of weeks where we're just like, my pastor and I are talking, we're like, kind of got nothing. We're going to have to do thematic this week. So there is a need for that. At the same time, most churches sing anywhere from 75 to maybe max 150 or 200 songs on a regular basis. That's a pretty limited set list.
Yeah.
Most churches, even churches that have people on the worship team who love Psallos, won't be singing every Psallos song.
Right.
Once you have the whole congregational series out and hundreds of congregational songs, that's more than almost any church can sing, even if all they sing were Psallos songs. And I'm sure you'd say with everybody else, there's value to singing other songs too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for that, there's such a limited diet in the sense of what we're singing the best of the best on Sunday mornings. And we need to be thinking about and hearing more scripture, and music is one of the best ways we can do that the rest of the week.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say one thing
Sure.
about that. One of the components that played into how we approached to creating these songs was we asked the question of, like, what do we mean by congregational singing? Because that's a term that can mean a few different things. And I think we default and we think congregational singing must fit these musical stylistic criteria. And we thought about it, well, it's congregational for which congregation, and not every congregation sings the same type of songs. And that's why on this album, there's 9 songs, but there's meant to be a variety of intersections for this. I don't anticipate all 9 songs would work for any given church, but 1 or 2 of them might work for a certain church, or the majority of them could, depending on how they approach picking out their songs. But we didn't want to limit ourselves to a certain style of the style of worship music. That's not very helpful. Worship music is in a variety of styles, and there's much more objective criteria that we took into consideration for that.
Speaking of criteria, in a sense, that does tie into the next question I had, which is that there are several thoroughly new songs or new songs with retuned hymn lyrics here, but there's also on this album a number of songs from the original Romans album.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what your process of taking a piece written as an artistic piece and adapting it for congregational use looked like. I'm curious, for instance, if you were looking to simplify elements or adapt things to simplify them to a verse, chorus, bridge structure, and were any of the ones you adapted a particular challenge?
So this project, just like the Romans album before it, it was the first of its kind. So we're feeling our way through the process of how we want to approach it. But what I thought about initially was it'd be good if we could bring some songs from the original Romans album onto those that were already oriented towards congregational singing. And there was a handful of those. So, I'm Not Ashamed of the Gospel, He Came to Die, and then A Sure Hope Part 2. They were already more congregational friendly. And so I can talk about just a second about how I kind of reimagined them. But then for the other songs, the newer songs, what I also wanted to do with that is I wanted to base them off of musical material, themes, and motives from the original Romans album, and then build a song off of that. So the 2 albums are interconnected, not just by the 3 songs that are on both projects, but musically they're sharing the same themes. So for the ones that we brought over, I guess the starting point was that they already sort of work the way that they are. And I tinkered around with like reworking them drastically, but then I think I thought it might mess with the integrity of the original one if I, tinkered with it too much. For the song A Sure Hope Part 2, which we entitled Who Shall Condemn for this one, Like I wrote a completely different version of it. I took all the same lyrics and I just rewrote the music and I showed it to some of the other people who are, who've helped me with this, Thomas Griffith and Dewey Boyd. And they kind of initially pointed out like, well, the original is better than what you just wrote. And the original is, it's familiar already. And that way people aren't confused by there being two really different versions of this song. So they're the same versions, sort of simplified, but it wasn't, that we took that into account, but I wasn't trying to, again, like if I simplify them too much, I don't know. I think we brought them over because we thought that they were simple enough already, and
That makes sense.
I didn't want to reshape them too much.
And they didn't seem reshaped too much, but I always thought in the back of my head there might be things you're doing that I didn't even notice. So I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious from that standpoint.
There are. I'm Not Ashamed of the Gospel song. It
Yeah.
was initially in this kind of 4/4 swing or maybe a 12/8, and I wanted to get away from the lilt a little bit, and so like I changed that to a straighter 4/4 that has, it's a little bit more syncopated, but syncopations we're fine with syncopations. Change the feel of that one a little bit more because the first time that appears on the album, it's inside this, public sphere and it's meant to sound like it's a live setting. So that one needed to be brought more into the studio and firmed up, so that, churches could maybe take some cues from that way we produced it.
Now, in the live, there aren't many Psallos live streams out there. There's a few public and then a few more for Patreon supporters.
Yeah.
And in the ones I've seen, unless you're specifically going through an epistle, like you're doing a premiere of an epistle or something like that, you often end your concert. You've often ended your live concerts with this song. Is it fair to say that I'm Not Ashamed is maybe Psallos' most recognized song?
I don't know if it's the most recognized, but it's really dear to us.
Yeah.
So again, it came from the Romans album, and in that project, it starts on like track 2 or 3, so it's early on. It's set up, and then there's a reprise of it at the very end, and it turns into a benediction at the end. And so when we perform Romans live, we always sing that, and the congregation joins us as we sing. And it's a very sweet moment. I think a very meaningful moment for the audience when they're joining in on that. And I think that's just kind of become how we close out an album, or close out a concert, just by kind of singing, dismissing each other as now the gospel go and preach. So it's core to the book of Romans, the Romans album, and I think to our group as well. Yeah.
Did you have any hesitancy in changing up the feel and adding more syncopation, given how well recognized it is by your listeners? Or on the flip side, had you been doing it this one way for so long that you almost felt like it needed a fresh approach?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I thought about it. Like I thought, is this the right move? When we've always done it live, we've always done it the way that you would hear it on the Romans, on the beginning and at the end, and that more swung feel. But I wanted it to be the first track of the album, so it needed to have some energy. And the way that it sits in the original is it's laid back, because it's really setting up what's going to come. Whereas here, I wanted it to be its own standalone song that if you're doing it in church, it has enough musical merit of its own. Yeah, so that's why I changed that part a little bit.
This is a question I didn't really run by you in advance, but it just popped into my head as we're talking about it. So let's say that my church decided to sing I Am Not Ashamed as part of congregational music. Do you have a distinct preference that churches would do it syncopated going forward? Or if there's a church where a number of people have already become familiar with it, as it was on the Romans album, do you mind and are you bothered if people do it the older way?
No, either way is fine. I think this was an opportunity to present another version of the song, I guess, to put it on people's radar more, because it's housed inside the Romans album, which has 23 tracks, and worship leaders may not be coming to that to look for songs that they can do congregationally. Now, I've had people say that they sing that song in their churches, So this is a way to kind of say, okay, we're doing a project. These are songs that we think fit really well with the book of Romans, and they're oriented towards congregational singing. So this was one like, let's put it forward, and then while we're at it, let's you know make a little bit of a newer version of it.
Okay. Moving on to another one, He Came to Die.
Yeah.
It's based on the second half of Romans 3, and since that's kind of a long passage, I might not read it here for the sake of time.
Yeah.
But also it's in part because my question is a little more musically focused. Because up through the end of the first chorus, He Came to Die is a simple acoustic guitar-driven arrangement. Mm-hmm. But then after the full chorus, you have the full electric band, full praise band that kicks in. Was that mostly to build the song, or was it in part to show church musicians in multiple styles help somebody who's in a one-instrument church versus somebody in church with a full band envision how the song can work in their context?
Yeah, recognizing, I think a lot of churches are led by guitarists, and so we took it from the piano-centered part to be guitar-led. So you're right, the first half is just acoustic guitar, and then the band comes in more strongly than we did originally. But also, when we first did the Romans album, when we recorded it in 2014, we were very limited in our abilities, and I think we kind of took another stab at it, like, here's how we probably would have done it had we had more money and more time, more resources, to polish it up a little bit. But it does fit, as you said, nicely into probably what a lot of worship groups are comfortable playing: bass guitar, electric guitar as well, and drums. And so I think that fits nicely into some contemporary worship styles. And so we were aware of that as well.
Cool. And my church is most of the time single instrument. Usually that single instrument's a piano. But even so, if it had only been a full praise band the full way through, it might have been a little harder for people involved in music at my church to envision how it would work for us. But having that simpler first verse, even if it's acoustic guitar led, and even if we're not usually led, it's happened a few times, and not usually led on guitar, definitely helps us to see how in a small church single instrument context it works also.
And I at some point was thinking, like, so the way that we produced it, I guess I maybe should talk about that. Like,
sure,
it wasn't like we didn't produce it in such a way like, here's a manual for how you could do it at your church, because there's other songs that are not very friendly, and I need to probably talk about the other big part of our mission for this album. I created them the way that I kind of wanted to shape them musically, to make them beautiful, and then knowing that churches can use those and make versions of their own. So, I mean, I think all these songs could be played acoustically on a piano or on a guitar. I'm currently working on some videos I'm going to put out soon about just going through each song and saying, here's considerations to make about if you were to do this in your church. Here's a tough chord, but here's how you play it. And if there's any intimidation with how these songs sound on the album, they can translate very easily with just a guy and a guitar or someone at the piano. And so I want to make those resources available to people in time.
Are those going to be on Patreon?
I'll do them on YouTube. I'll put them on YouTube for everybody. Yeah, because they're going to be geared towards pastors and worship leaders who are looking for songs in the Book of Romans that their church can sing and say, like, here's how you do it. The chord charts, we have all the chord charts on for free online to make that easier for people to perform these. And of course, we have the song book as well, and then strings, woodwinds, and brass parts for churches who have those instruments.
Yes. All right. I have the YouTube link in the show notes as I've been drafting them already. I just wanted to make sure I was linking people to the right place. Yeah. I have the Patreon link too, but just wanted to make sure we're pointing people to the right place for this.
Yeah.
So I have to say one of my favorite songs from of the new ones is "O Christ, What Burdens." The call and response structure is different from the rest of the album, kind of helps it stand out. And the song's energy is infectious. I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they'll just start dancing when it comes on. And the other day, we were just sitting listening to music, and that came on, and just totally unprompted, my 3-year-old said, "That's a good song." He doesn't say that
Nice.
often. So
Yeah.
anyhow, they appreciate it too. So you have a new chorus here that's pulled from Romans 8:1, which says,
Mm-hmm.
"There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit." And the source text for the verse lyrics comes from an old Ann Cousin lyric, "O Christ, O burdens bow thy head."
Mm-hmm.
At first glance, looking at the lyric, I don't know if I would have made the connection to a no condemnation passage. And as I reflected on it a while, I have some guesses how you might have gotten there. But either way, I would love to hear how you chose and then adapted this lyric to be the lyric for the no condemnation song.
Yeah. So I wrote this probably 2.5 years ago, so I don't remember
Sure.
exact process. But I think it was one of our, I did a call out to our patrons just to suggestions on good hymns that they knew from the book of Romans. And one of them sent this to me. And as soon as I read it, I thought, oh, this is a good hymn text. I love Ann Cousin. One of my favorite hymns is Sands of Time Are Sinking, that she wrote.
That
So
is a very good
powerful.
song.
Yeah, the imagery, the poetry of it. And so this one just, I could tell right away it's a very special text, but I'd never heard it before. I'd never seen it before. And just when I think in my memory, just right away I thought, oh, Romans, this is Romans chapter 8. Like this is the good news because of what Christ has done for us. Because I think the way that she approached writing this is that, Christ pays for our punishment. He pays our debt. He's the sacrifice, and we get his benefits. So it's that doctrine of imputation of he's punished for our sins and his righteousness is imputed to us. What's interesting to me that after I had that thought of how I want to connect it to Romans 8:1 specifically, I then afterwards looked it up online and I found that there are some settings of this text, but all of them are like in a minor key and are
Hmm.
sorrowful. And I get that because, it's about the crucifixion of Christ, and I think it would be natural to come to it with that emotion, but that's not how I read it initially. I mean, it seemed to me like this is a joyous celebration of what Christ has done for us. Both of those are appropriate. I think you can take that text and adapt it many different ways. But I just saw this is the good news of the gospel. This is the beauty of Romans chapter 8, which is just so central to our theology. Yeah, and then I wanted to create something that matched that emotion of, celebratory, joyful, and it turned into a call and response, which I love call and response types of songs. They're not used very often in churches, but they work. They're very straightforward. I'm going to sing this part. You're going to sing this part. You put the leader in normal typeset on a screen, and then the congregational part in bold. And I've done that song at a few different places, and I've been surprised by how quickly congregations latch on to that, and how easy it is to follow. Like it takes 10 seconds of teaching, but then they get it. They really enjoy singing it, and it also allowed me to stretch the leader's role, like his or her melodic range, just a little bit more because I know the
Hmm.
congregation's not singing there. So it gets me out of the box a little bit of musical limitations. Yeah, that's one. Whenever I pitched it to my buddies, they're like, I don't know how this song is going to turn out, and I didn't either. But it's one that on the back end, I look back and think, yeah, I think this is a song that churches could use, and hopefully it'll be a blessing to them.
I think it will. I think this is one that will work congregationally because no matter how good a song is, if a congregation can't pick it up by at least the second time a church does it, third time at worst, it's going to have a hard. Most congregations will have a
Yeah.
hard time using a song like this that a congregation will pick up straight away. That really helps. So, staying in Romans 8, but moving to the end of the chapter, one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture is the assurance passage of
Hmm.
who will separate us from the love of Christ. And who will bring a charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is he who condemns? It is Christ who died, and furthermore is also risen, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. And that would be the passage you drew from for who shall condemn, which, as you mentioned earlier, I recognized immediately, but then I was looking through the Romans track list, and I was like, wait, which one was it? And it was a Sure Hope Part 2 on the Romans track list. But in a standalone context here, Part 2 wouldn't have made sense, so I think the title change makes sense. So the verse lyrics are based on a Benjamin Bedham, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly.
I don't know either. That's how I say it.
Either way.
Yeah.
A Benjamin Bedham lyric from the 1700s, which is known either by its first line, "Who shall condemn to endless flames," or it's in some hymnals titled "The Consequences of Election."
Okay.
And just curious, was this song already seeing some congregational use? Had you heard of people using it before this album? And I don't know if I have a specific question beyond that, but I'd just be curious to hear anything interesting from the writing process.
I don't know if it was being used by churches. I know that it's one of the more popular songs on the Romans album, which just means it's more accessible than some of the other ones, and accessibility is that can mean something for congregational singing, that it's easy to latch onto quickly. But it was another one that we thought, it has a nice arc to it, and how it builds. It has the refrain, which we repeat enough where you're gonna know it by the end. So it's just some characteristics that we thought already worked for congregational singing, so we brought that one over. And like I said earlier, I tried to rewrite it to make it, I don't know, didn't have to. It has some syncopation in there as well. I think maybe that's something I was thinking, well, maybe I should simplify it, iron it out, but I think it works as it is. But the changes there is I took that refrain, and the song now starts with "We have a sure hope" at the beginning, so it gets integrated on the front end, or introduced on the front end, and then in the middle, the strings take that melody one more time during the instrumental break, which is a new part, just to kind of keep it in the background of the listener's or the singer's mind, and then it unleashes more at the end with fewer repetitions, but just felt like the right amount for a corporate setting.
Cool. Moving a few chapters ahead to Romans 11:33. It says, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out." And you pull from that chorus, not quite word for word, but pull pretty clearly from that chorus, "For wait, O my soul," for which you actually found another Benjamin Bedham lyric.
Yeah.
How did you find that one, and choose to pair it with this verse in Romans?
I don't remember. I looked through tons of hymnals, old hymnals, Spurgeon's hymnal, Oldie hymnal, and I think I found it probably one of those. And it was just another one where you see it, and like right away you're just struck by the beauty of the text, the weight of the text. And yeah, I was really excited to find that, and then thinking about how to set it to do it justice. Of let the poetry speak, because it's all the potency is already in the words. And then with that one, it lined up in my mind with the end of the doxology in Romans chapter 11. So that song, the way that Benjamin Bedham wrote it was, or the poem, "Wait, O my soul," the God's sovereign, He's got everything in His control. It's really a poem of comfort, of like, if you're going through, if you're going through suffering or whatever your circumstances, just know that the Lord's got you. And like, I think about, so like for Romans 9, 10, 11, that was a struggle for me to know how I wanted to find music to that. I have no problems with Romans 9, the theology of Romans 9, 10, or 11, but I didn't want to just put a song in there about Romans 9 and make it too heavy-handed. Instead I wanted to think about how do we properly respond to what Paul's saying in these 3 chapters about how God hasn't neglected Israel. He's been faithful to Israel in His promises. He'll be faithful to us with His promises. And I love how Paul closes that little 3-chapter section of just saying, "Oh, the depth of the mysteries. It's beyond us, but it's good, and we can take comfort for it. To Him be the glory." So I thought it's best just to kind of gravitate towards that. And I thought Benjamin Bedham's words really ushered us to that place. And then, I wrote a chorus that was borrowing heavily from the words of the doxology, and just made it like this is kind of a summary of what Benjamin Bedham was saying, and then set it all to music.
Neat. The next chapter, Romans 12, it starts verse 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. I think you found a great match for this verse in the Francis Havergal hymn, Take My Life and Let It Be. Did you start here with writing the new living sacrifice chorus and then looked for a classic hymn that made sense for the verses? Or did you find the hymn first? You this is my hymn for this passage, and then you brought in the chorus to match the hymn.
It was words first, and I know I love the hymn "Take My Life and Let It Be," and so it's always been on my my mind to use it. I mean, it really lines up well with with Romans chapter 12. But then musically, it was trying to create it to make it where it's a compliment to the "Lay Down Your Life" song on our original Romans album. But musically, I don't know if you're familiar with the melody that we used, the "Take My Life and Let It Be." It's that's original to John B. Dykes, I believe. I think the
Okay.
tune is called "Saint Bees," and it's the
Okay.
tune used in the Trinity hymnal. We use that at our church. We have the Baptist version of the Trinity hymnal, and it's a beautiful, beautiful tune. We do it on piano, and just the voices, like the inner voices, the way it's part written is just it's perfect. It's beautiful, and I like the other version as well. The "Take My Life and Let It Be," and I
Yeah.
considered doing that one, but I thought, in the spirit of trying to expose the church to great songs and maybe less familiar melodies for it, I went with that for the verse music, and then wrote chorus melody, chorus words that were kind of springing off of that, and that's where I was borrowing more from Roman's album.
Neat. I actually didn't know it was an old melody.
Yeah,
I'm not. I've known it pretty much my whole life, I think, but I'd only ever known it to the other melody, so I just thought you'd written a new one.
yeah. I wish I could take
But
credit
I
for that
didn't know.
one.
That's
It's
cool.
beautiful.
It is, and I really like that melody. In fact, my church sang "Take My Life and Let It Be" totally unrelated. Actually, my pastor picked it. I didn't pick it. Saying "Take My Life and Let It Be" as our closing hymn this last Sunday,
Yeah.
and as I was playing it, I was thinking maybe just maybe we can introduce the Psallos version of this one of these days.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, kind of veering in a different direction, a more broad rather than a specific song question. You posted a behind the scenes video of the recording process for Patreon viewers at this moment, and eventually for everyone.
Hmm.
And as I was watching that on Patreon the other day, one location particularly jumped out, which it said he recorded the strings at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Nashville.
Right.
And was this after the tragedy that happened at their school, or had you already recorded this by that point?
We had already recorded in their sanctuary before then. So we recorded in there in August 2022.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was we went to that space because the guy who does most of our engineering, Dewey Boyd, he knew the people at the church, and it's a beautiful space, a beautiful church building. The acoustics are great, and so we recorded grand piano and strings inside of there, and it was a magical moment for us, for the players, for me, and for the engineer. But yeah, and then I don't know how many months later it was, but
I
yeah,
think it was
then
last year.
okay, yeah, then
I
the shooting
think.
afterwards, and so that, even though I'm not from Nashville, I don't go to that church, but just our limited touch point and involvement at that church, like we really felt the weight of it. And I think what
Hmm.
was really meaningful to me is that inside that room, where that church gathered beforehand and afterwards and just praised the Lord, that's where we recorded the strings for "Wait, Oh My Soul," and that song especially, like that's God's sovereign unknowable will. Everything he does is good. You have to trust him. And so that song wasn't out there, and that was just kind of a moment for for me and my wife as we thought about just the tragedy of it. But still, it's the Lord's good. It's all in His hands. It's all in His providence. But yeah, and then we got to know some of the staff there, and one of the gentlemen we interacted with, he was one that passed away and all that. So it was just heavy, really hard situation.
Yeah.
But grateful for their faithfulness throughout all of it.
They handled it as well as anybody could have, from
Right,
everything I
think
saw.
you're right.
On a brighter note, when we were going through the Philippians episode, we discussed that if a church wants to put on a production of an entire Psallos album as like a performance piece, as an artistic piece, there's like a licensing process and licensing fee. But if churches just want to sing an individual Psallos song as part of their services,
Mm-hmm.
is that covered through the normal CCLI process for CCLI members, or is there anything additional that churches ought to do if they want to use one of their songs as just a congregational song in a Sunday morning service?
CCLI should be sufficient. I've registered all those
Cool.
songs with CCLI, and so they should be able to find them on there. And then, like I said, website, our Psallos.com has chord charts for free, and we have other sheet music. We're trying to equip churches to, if they want to sing these songs, here's some ways to make it easier for you. You don't have to come up with your own chord charts. Done all that for you, and in different keys as well. And that's we have the album key that we do it in that might best fit my vocalists. But the way that they do it isn't always the sweet spot for your typical church. And so for any song that's a little bit too high or too low, I have a version that's in a safer key.
Nice. Was there anything in the individual songs or overall for A Sure Hope that comes to mind as something that people might find it particularly interesting if you mentioned, even if it was something I might not have thought to ask about?
Yeah, one thing I'll say is the primary purpose for this album, and then every album in this series that's going to come after it, Lord willing, is we are trying to just give the church songs that they can sing that that are rich in theology, and and tied close to scripture. So it's just there's such a benefit of knowing that, oh, this song you can it lines up well with this text. But there are other parts of our mission that I think might be helpful for me to talk through. So these songs, they are. I mean, I believe personally that they're congregation, that they work well for corporate singing. But and I've already had people tell me this. They're not the easiest songs to sing corporately, and that's a little bit by design. What I want Psallos to be doing is Psallos is we're a movement where we're trying to help to shape what worship music in the church today can be, through our presentational albums and also through our congregational albums. There's a way to write a worship song, a congregational worship song that I know is going to land right, that's going to be playing it safe with musical structure, melodies, harmonies, rhythms, all of those things. My background's in composition. And so that pushes me to want to think, well, I think it's true, and I think many would agree that a lot of the songs we're singing today, they sound a little formulaic, and it's because they are formulaic. You follow certain formulas to write a song, and I'm not trying to talk bad about that necessarily. There's a place for that. I've written a lot of formulaic songs that verse, chorus, bridge, chorus model. Here's what the bridge is supposed to do. Here's what the chorus is supposed to do. But I am, with this album and others, I'm trying to just stretch what congregational, biblically saturated worship music can be. And I know that it's not going to necessarily land with everybody, and that's okay. This is about that as well. That process of just trying to what I call adventurous songwriting for the church, of taking risks, of trying new things, and especially all the new songs on there, they have aspects of them that are unconventional, whether it's the use of form or the phrase structure, like the song "Oh Christ, What Burdens." It's the call and response, but if you count the measures, it's 5 bar phrase structures, and so that's
Hmm.
irregular. We're used to like 4+4 or 2+2, so it's uneven. It's off kilter a little bit, but I think in a good way. I'm not trying to like alienate people with these songs. In fact, I'm trying to bring them in, but expand what the musical language of the church can be, and that may not be for everybody. And I'm fine with that, but we're trying to put something out there that might help to shape the musical culture of the church. And so that's also running parallel with our mission of just trying to write good, biblically solid songs for people to sing.
I love it. And I also love that on this album there are songs for churches that want to be a little adventurous.
Mm-hmm.
And then and that if it was just me, I do it, but in a church like mine where it's largely senior citizens, more people over 80, over 75 than under 75 probably. And it sings a lot of traditional hymns and then a few modern hymns. We almost kind of have to play it a little safer just for what our context can handle. And there's songs for us too. Like there are songs, there's no reason why I Am Not Ashamed couldn't work in our context. Yeah. And realistically, Take My Life and Let It Be could also. The only hesitation would be if they've sung it to one melody their whole life, they might not want to switch to another melody. But outside of a factor like that, structurally, Take My Life and Let It Be could certainly work in our context. So there are songs for churches that want to be a little more adventurous structurally, but there's also songs on this album for churches that work in a bit of a more traditional context. Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not trying to like overwhelm people with novelty or avant-garde sounds, but I'm very much after. I believe the music of the church should be beautiful, not just functional and facilitating singing and emotion. It should do those things, but in such a way that it creates really meaningful, deep, profound, multi-layered experiences for the congregation. And that's why some of them are arranged and scored the way that they are with strings and woodwinds. I know that most churches don't have those at their disposal, and that's fine. You don't have to have those parts in order to do it. But I wanted to present something that I think it's beautiful, it's artistic, and if it doesn't work well for your church, hopefully just as you listen to it, it's an enjoyable experience, because that's also, this is an album that's available for people to stream and buy and listen to. And so you're going to maybe listen to it just as much in that context, if not more, than in the context of people singing it.
Exactly. So as we move toward conclusion, how can people keep up with Psallos online? We've already mentioned the website. We can mention it again here for somebody who may have been driving at the start and is now ready to write it down. How can people follow you online? And if you would maybe make special mention of their Patreon, where people can go deeper on a lot of these songs and help these projects happen.
Yeah, so our website, psallos.com, www.psallos.com. And on our website, you'll find links to a lot of our other places, but one of those would be our Patreon account. And if you're not familiar with Patreon, it's just a way for people to support our group, our ministry, make these projects. We have very ambitious goals of not only setting all 21 New Testament letters to music, but also to creating 21 companion albums. And so we have so much music that we want to write, and we just can't do it without people's support. And so if you want to do that, just a little bit a month, it means a lot as well. You can type in, I think it's patreon.com/Psallos, or just, search engine Psallos Patreon, or on our website, we'll take you through there as well. And we do the social media thing, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're not super active on those mediums, but we do occasionally. But the main way I disseminate information and updates is through our Patreon account for just, our individual community. And but just check out our website as well.
Sounds good. I've really enjoyed this new album. I enjoyed the original Romans too, but as somebody with involvement in church music, It was really cool to see you bring some of the older songs into a congregational setting and offer us some new ones. So thank you for putting this album together, and thank you also for taking the time to come on and do this podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Glad to. And to the listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to catch future episodes. You can also find past episodes in the free 62,000 entry Expository Songs searchable database at danielmount.com. Thank you for listening.